What's up, guys? Welcome back to the MontyVerse. Today we have another trailer reaction. We're going to be reacting to the trailer for Amazon's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power second trailer. And joining me, I have two fantastic guests. I have the fantastic one himself, Dan Bettenhausen from the Fancast at 4 podcast, and Jack Mayer. Some may call him the Pixar King. Others may just call him Jack. What's up, guys?
How's it going, Monty?
Oh, it's going great.
I'm so excited. I'm surprised you didn't introduce me as a frequent guest on the Fantastic Four podcast.
Right. Yes, frequent collaborator on the Fantastic Four podcast. Some of the best episodes of the podcast were Jack's. Definitely check them out.
Yeah, if you love cats or Tom Hooper or M. Night Shyamalan, you will love his episodes.
Especially Mark Wahlberg in M. Night Shyamalan.
Guys, but speaking of things that should never exist, we have what some may consider something that should have never happened. Jeff Bezos' love child of Prime Video. The something that they threw mountains and mountains of money at. The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. For me, I'm not really well versed on Middle-earth lore. I'm kind of a casual when it comes to that. I've delved a lot more into fantasy recently in my life. It's not something I grew up with like comic books, but I am a big fan of the Lord of the Rings films. But like I said, I'm pretty much a casual fan. I know that both of you guys are pretty well versed in the lore. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm going to correct you because you are very wrong. I am similar. I mean, I've seen the Lord of the Rings films numerous times, director's cuts, whatever version there's been out, I've seen it. But as far as the lore, it's something I'm starting to dive into more, especially with this show coming up. But it has been years since I've read the book. I only ever read the books once, and that was a long time ago. So really, my consumption is through the films. I noticed you didn't say the Hobbit films. You said the Lord of the Rings films.
That was not a mistake. That was done intentionally.
I only read the books.
Interesting. This is a book reaction. Thank you for joining us on the first ever book reaction.
This is going to be a dramatic reading of Chapter 1 of The Fellowship of the Ring, actually.
Everyone please turn to page 1 as we now react.
No, so I guess that I am the most versed in Middle-earth then at this point, because I've read the books multiple times. I've watched the movies at least twice a year. Extended cuts pretty much only. I've read the Silmarillion. I have read The Hobbit. I may or may not have seen the movies. It's impossible to know. But I would say I'm pretty well versed in Middle-earth.
All right, okay. Awesome.
Can I test you? How do you pronounce the dragon's name?
Smaug.
Oh, I thought it was pronounced Benedict Cumberbatch. I've been saying it wrong this whole time.
No, Smaug. You have to really elongate it.
Yeah. Nope. Okay, checks out.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's dive in to this trailer. Let's do it in 3, 2, 1. Nothing like a teaser for the trailer before the trailer.
Already I'm kind of out.
My brother gave his life hunting the enemy. His task is now mine. Speak your truth. We already know. Stand with me. Ours was no chance meeting. Not fate. Nor destiny. Ours was the work of something greater.
Looks like she's collecting her own fellowship. Got some wargs in the forest.
Each of us, every one, must decide who we shall be.
A lot of ships, a lot less walking.
I am not the hero
Yeah.
you seek.
A lot of like character
Whatever it
reveals.
was you did,
Yeah.
be free of it.
I don't know if I'm
One
supposed
day
to know
this
who
will
they
be
are.
your kingdom.
I don't think so.
Choose not the path of fear, but that of faith.
Production design's honestly not terrible.
No.
One thing we can do, better than any creature in all Middle-earth. We stay true to each other. With our hearts even bigger in our feet. I can survive this. You and I.
Commander! Wait!
No, we keep moving.
Why do you keep fighting?
There is a tempest in me.
You have fought long enough, Galadriel. Put up your sword.
Without it, what am I to be?
All right. It looks nice.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know what's happening though.
So what it looks like to me, and I think the one character that I feel fairly confident is, and if you've heard otherwise, is that the main blonde woman is Galadriel.
Yeah, that is Glad. They said it in the trailer that it's Galadriel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I must have had the volume a little too low then, because I missed them saying that, but I believe that is the one character that it was identified then. It looks like she's putting together some sort of, again, to use verbiage from the books and movies, of a fellowship of ourselves for some quest, assuming having to do with a ring, maybe, since the title of the show is Rings of Power. But looks like she is gathering a troop herself for some quest.
Jack,
It
you
also-
kind of... Oh no, go... I'm sorry.
It also kind of seems like we're following a lot of different sections of Middle Earth as well.
Yeah.
Like it almost seems like we're going to have something similar. We were talking about this before we got on, something similar to the most recent season of Stranger Things, where you have a bunch of storylines happening in different places that are eventually all going to cross over. That's kind of what it seems like to me.
Yeah, and this is set thousands of years, if I'm not mistaken, right? Before
It's
the
set-
events.
Quite some time before the events of The Hobbit, even.
Okay. So this is like a very long time ago. It looks interesting. It looks like, you could definitely see all the money they put into the show, because it looks very different from what came before it, but at the same time, it still looks really good. So, like, it looks a lot better than the Hobbit films.
Good. Oh, it looks way better than the Hobbit movies.
And that was gonna be my point, that it looks like the money wasn't put into just CGI heavy
Yeah.
shots. Looks
Yeah.
like they are using a lot of practical effects, a lot of landscape. You see that sweeping view of them running across the landscapes there. It seems like the money is put into what made the Lord of the Rings trilogy successful, and not hopefully making some of the same mistakes that the Hobbit films made.
I don't necessarily agree with that.
Okay.
I feel like, again, I think a lot of that production design does look very nice. It looks like it's blending more CGI and practical effects like The Hobbit was, but it does seem like there's, to me at least, a little bit more of a reliance on computer-generated effects.
I'm not saying there isn't any. I'm just saying it's hopefully trending more towards Lord of the Rings and away from how heavy-handed it was in The Hobbit. The one shot that's still kind of like, okay, this looks a little cheesy, is when they're climbing up the ice wall. You see her. That looks the most CGI heavy to me. I'm like, okay, I hope that's less of that and more of what we got.
The creatures as well, I think, just, again, some of them look really nice, but then, those little like wolf things that we saw that were those look awful to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I was speaking with Matt Thomas, friend of the show from Watt Real Entertainment, and he was saying that he is a diehard Lord of the Rings fan, and he said that a lot of the Lord of the Rings diehard fans, they're really not happy with the way the production went on the show because they kind of steered very clear of the filmmaking of the original trilogy, and they kind of did their own thing, kind of, and it's sort of that lack of respect that they're not too happy with in terms of the filmmaking of it. Jack, do you have? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
do, because I have a lot to say about that. Because I feel like with a show like this, you actually need to go as far away from the Peter Jackson films as you can. This show is not technically set in the same universe that the Jackson films are. They're still Middle Earth, obviously, but it's not connected to the story that Peter Jackson told with The Hobbit and with The Lord of the Rings. And I think that's honestly kind of the problem that a lot of people are having when approaching this series. It's a problem that I was having as well when I was initially learning about it and reading about it and doing all that. You have to disassociate this from the Peter Jackson films. This is not Ian McKellen as Gandalf, Lord of the Rings. This is not Viggo Mortensen and Elijah Wood and that story. It is a story of Middle Earth, but it is not made by the same people. It is not, like streamlined by Warner Brothers and New Line. It is Amazon's Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, and though it might be difficult, you have to disassociate the two in order to watch this.
Okay, so this is technically not set in the same universe. I didn't know that. I was under the assumption that it was set in the same universe as the Peter Jackson films.
It is not the canonized same universe as the Peter Jackson movies now.
All right. That's the comic book guy in me.
And I think that was also not just an Amazon decision. It was at the request of the Tolkien estate, if I believe, there's people in that estate who were not so fond of the Jackson interpretation of the films, so they wanted to have it be disassociated with those films as well. As much as I love them, some in the estate were not. Those who managed the Tolkien estate were not so fond of the Jackson interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has a different look. It has a different feel. It looks a little brighter at certain points. It looks a little shinier in certain points.
Looks a lot newer.
Yeah, a lot new. It's almost like comparing, and I don't want to really make this comparison, but I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. It's almost like comparing the OG Star Wars trilogy to the prequels, and how even though they were set before, everything looked newer and shinier and clean, as opposed to the gritty, dirtier look of the original trilogy.
Yeah, that's not a bad comparison, actually. I think that's
it's actually quite a good comparison. But again, I think that you're gonna have those people, those naysayers who find that sort of gritty realism of the Peter Jackson Middle Earth films, who are just completely checked out from this series because of that technology, because it does, again, to me at least, somebody who I'm gonna age myself here. I was born the same year that Fellowship came out. But I did grow up watching those 3 Lord of the Rings movies on DVD. I had the extended editions on Blu-ray. So you grow up with that aesthetic of this is what Middle Earth looks like, and now in comes something that is not what the Middle Earth that you've come to know looks like, and you have to wrap your brain around that, and it's difficult. I have a lot of other problems with what I think this story seems to be doing, but we can dive into that a little bit more later if we want to.
I mean, we are maybe fortunate in some ways, unfortunate in other ways, with Lord of the Rings to really have the Jackson interpretation as the kind of end-all, be-all visual medium for it, at least live action, not counting the animated versions. Whereas, I know a lot of us here are Batman fans. We've had 1,000 different visual interpretations of Batman via comics, via movies, via television, and I think fans have been able to get over that. So I think if you look at it in that regard, like, okay, this is just a different interpretation. Where we have Nolan's Batman, we have the current Reeves Batman, we have all the different Batman iterations. That's how I'm gonna try and go into it. It's like, okay, this is just a different iteration. Same Gotham, same Middle Earth, just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, and Jack, you did bring up the story, which is something that I was really curious about, and I wanted to ask you about, because I really don't know what the story they're kind of telling is, and you said you were a little upset with some of the things they're doing with the story, and I was curious to know like what that is.
I'm more so upset with the way that they seem to be interpreting Tolkien's world. And forgive me for a moment while I like indulge a little bit of history here, but like,
no, go for it.
All of fantasy is really based on history. It's based on these old systems from like way back 14th, 15th century. And history is incredibly patriarchal. And that is something that is really explored in the Jackson films. That is something that ties directly to both the stories of Arwen, but especially the story of Éowyn in The Two Towers and The Return of the King. This whole idea of women don't do battle is something that is incredibly important to the Lord of the Rings and like the entirety of Middle Earth as well. It's one of the big problems with The Hobbit as well, is that idea of, you know, women don't do battle is a like staple of Middle Earth. And I'm not saying that they should have kept that, but I find it strange that they're not really addressing it in this show. They sort of address it in The Hobbit with Tariel and that whole idea of what she's doing and how it contradicts what Thranduil thinks and the elves. But this seems to be Tolkien taken into 2022 and then set back to that historical society that Tolkien wrote. And I'm not sure how well that's going to match.
I get you. I understand where you're coming from, because it's kind of like the main character of the series, the protagonist, appears to be Galadriel, unless I misinterpreted that.
Yeah, that's absolutely, I think, going to be the main character. And Galadriel seems to, at the start of the show, be doing battle, a respected warrior.
Yeah.
And again, I think that there is absolutely a way that they can make that work. But in the world that Tolkien wrote, that doesn't necessarily align.
Yeah, I get what you're trying to say. Like they need to address that in story, because yes, while that is the norm for our modern day world, that, you know, there are strong women and women can do everything, and that's the kind of stories that we want to tell now.
It is, absolutely. It's the stories that we need to see now.
Yes, there needs to be a reason for that in this world that existed pre all of this. And
exactly.
Gotcha. And I think that's a really good point to bring up, because yeah, if you're just going to just do it for the sake of doing it, it kind of does a disservice to the story that you're trying to tell based off of the source material.
Exactly. If you're going to force representation and you're going to force all of these modern things into this world, it's going to feel exactly that. It's going to feel forced. Dan,
you're muted, Dan.
Sorry.
No,
is a potential panacea for that just saying thousands of years ago it was different? I mean, or is it even in that time frame still something that was kind of established then? And then
then I guess the question would just be, how did society in Middle Earth regress so much thousands of years later?
I mean, look at modern day, but that's neither here. But so yeah, so that might just be this feeling like, hey, society did regress some when it came to.
And again, I hope they address that in story. Again, I think that having more diversity, having more representation. Again, like, I'm somebody who does not necessarily always see myself represented on the screen, being part of the LGBTQ community, but I think that, you know, and I think that like that sort of representation is incredibly important, and it's important to have that in mainstream works. But as somebody who has such a tie to Tolkien and to the worlds that he did create in his books in The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and especially in The Silmarillion, I am curious to see how they address it.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a very valid point for someone who's as well versed in the source material as you to bring up. Is there anything else that you guys noticed in the trailer that you wanted to touch on? I mean, the song was pretty kicking. I liked it. It was kind of like, I don't know why I'm gonna make this comparison, but it was kind of like having like the Evanescence songs, like in trailers in the mid 2000s, the early mid to late 2000s. But I really liked it. I thought it gave it a lot of energy, and it gave it this kind of like epic, strong feeling to it. There were a lot of like character reveal moments in the trailer, like characters taking their hoods off or turning towards camera, and I'm like, those look like really cool characters. I don't know who any of them are.
That's the thing. I felt like it wasn't so much like, oh, here's a character we're supposed to connect to. It's like, oh, there's the elf. Oh, there's the dwarf.
The dwarf. There's the hobbit.
Right. It was more like, hey, remember these from the Fellowship? That's what we're getting again, but years and years and years ago.
I'm putting a team together.
So that's it, huh? What, we some kind of Lord of the Rings of Power?
You son of a bitch, I'm in. Like, honestly, if that was one episode where they were just going from person to person, they just said, you son of a bitch, I'm in, like in Rick and Morty, I would probably love it so much. But yeah, that's what this trailer felt like. It felt like it was showing us, like, hey, remember this? Remember these people? Well, guess what? We're doing it.
And that's kind of all they've been doing with this show as well. Like, they haven't really revealed a ton of characters besides Galadriel. And I think part of the reason they haven't done that is because they know that not a lot of people know the story beyond Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
Yeah. Which, listen, it's smart marketing. It's a smart way to market a show, especially a show to a franchise that doesn't crank out as much content as, say, your Marvels or your Star Wars in modern day. You know, this is very much a franchise that peaked in the early 2000s. And then we got 3 Hobbit movies. And so I think now it's just kind of saying, like, hey, we're coming back. And I want you guys to remember this stuff. And I want you guys to just be excited to come back into this world.
We did also, I think, get a glimpse at Elrond, but again, they didn't like say his name directly, and it's not Hugo Weaving, so
yeah, something like, "Oh, Elrond, glad you could join us." Like nothing like.
It would be hilarious if they got Ross Marquand to play Elrond, like they did Red Skull in the MCU. He's just always replacing Hugo Weaving in roles. That's just the rest of his career.
I am interested to see how this show does overall, because we were talking about before starting recording how House of the Dragon recorded or 10 million viewers at least live for the premiere of and Game of Thrones was this big iconic thing, and curious if how Game of Thrones ended was going to impact that. While there's a lot of lore, a lot of confusion, a lot of stuff going on with Game of Thrones, probably not a drop in the bucket compared to the Lord of the Rings lore. So
I think that with Game of Thrones, though, it's a little bit of a different case because Game of Thrones ended on such a sour note for many people that seeing new Game of Thrones content, not done by Benioff and Weiss, people are wanting it to be good so bad. And when it's good and it hits, people are like all over it. They're excited about it. They're going to be talking about it. Even though the Hobbit movies have declined in the general populace since their release, people did still go see them and enjoy elements of them. Yeah. And people still go back and they watch those Lord of the Rings movies because you can disassociate the Lord of the Rings trilogy from the Hobbit trilogy. Right. There's not really a disassociation between the last few seasons of Game of Thrones with the first few seasons because it's all one big story. So I think that there's a lot more hesitancy for this where it's like, you know, you have these great things that even if the Hobbit wasn't great, like Lord of the Rings still ended so strong. So now you're coming into this new world and it's scary for a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, I think just from based off of the general consensus I'm seeing from online, like Twitter reactions and people on message boards and people like Matt, like all the people who are fans of Tolkien, who are and are fans of Lord of the Rings, are generally really excited to see this, and they're gonna watch it no matter what. And me, as someone who is a fan of those movies, I'm really curious to watch this as well because I want to revisit this world and I want to get to know this universe a little bit better. And it's actually interesting because Game of Thrones is telling, House of the Dragons is telling a very similar story to this to a certain extent. They're both about these female warriors because that's what I'm gathering from the House of the Dragons first episode, and that kind of touches upon the stuff that you brought up about Tolkien's work about how females were not commonly seen on the battlefield, and that has a woman who is doing something that no one before her has done, and that's being the heir to the throne. So that's a really interesting comparison, and it's really interesting to see how these two shows are going to work airing at the same time, and how they're going to tell similar stories in their own unique ways, in their own unique worlds. So I'm really curious.
I'm very excited to see how the two compare and contrast.
Yeah.
I mean, because they are going to compete.
Yeah, and I did enjoy the first episode of House of Dragons so far. I think it definitely feels like old Game of Thrones, so I'm excited to see more of it.
And I think that's the other thing is that I think a lot of people seem to be under the impression that fans of Lord of the Rings want this to be bad. No, fans of Lord of the Rings want this show to be great.
Yeah.
But I can see why some fans are hesitant. I'm still hesitant going into it, but I'm still going to watch every episode when it premieres.
I think a big concern I have about this show really has nothing to do with the story itself. It's how it's constructed. I don't. This isn't a Game of Thrones or a House of the Dragon reaction, but I think Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon overall is successful because each episode feels like an episode of television. It's not saying, oh, this show is just one big movie. Yeah. I have fears that this show is going to be like, oh, it's one big Tolkien film just spread out over X episodes.
Where they do like a second season that's completely not tied to the first season. And it's just, oh, we're just telling stories from the world of Tolkien, where it's like, no, I want to see an overarching multi-season story.
I want it to be television.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's something that Eric Kripke, from creator of The Boys and creator of Supernatural, has talked about in regards to young people coming up in the business today directing like streaming television or writing streaming television. They're so afraid. They just don't know how to write television. They want to write everything they want to write everything like 10-hour movies. And he's like, you can't do that. You got to write everything like a 1 hour. If you have a 1 hour TV, you have to write it like a 1 hour television show. And like Dan said, I'm excited to see them do that. Once you master that, and once you're able to craft episodic television that connects serialized and to tell the story that you want to tell, I think that's where you succeed the most in terms of the streaming game.
Agreed.
Yep.
But wow. Anything else you guys want to talk about in regards to this trailer or this show or?
Like I said, I loved when we saw that little glimpse of Sauron, and he said it's Sauron time.
I think it was voiced by Jared Leto, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how Sauron plays out through here. But no, I mean, I think in general, I am looking forward to. I am interested in the show. Don't know if the trailer affected me one way or the other, but I am happy to see at least some aspects of it not as CG heavy as I thought it might be.
I know Isildur is going to be a major role. Sorry, Dan, I cut you off there.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I know Isildur is going to play a role in at least season 1, so I'm curious to see how they expand on what we know of Isildur.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, and I'm just really looking forward to lighthearted fantasy again, like the original films and even the Hobbit films. They were these serious, epics, but they were bright and lighthearted, and there was a lot of heart into them. And Game of Thrones, I don't mean to compare the two, but it's a lot more serious and it's a lot more brutal and dark and depressing almost. And I want this to just be a fun adventure with some serious overtones and some real stakes. So that's really what I kind of want from this series.
Yeah, a little more D&D campaign than dark gritty,
Yeah,
bloodbath.
Yeah, exactly. But if that's it, do you guys got anything else, or you think that's it for the trailer?
I'm good.
It's mostly it. Yeah.
All right, guys, that's gonna wrap it up for here. Jack, where can the people find you?
You can find me every other week on the Fantastic Four podcast. I don't know what our next episode is going to be. Jen and I have been kicking around some ideas, but yeah, you know, I pitched him what if Nathan Fielder directed a Fantastic Four movie.
That would be a crazy Fantastic Four movie. For sure.
You'll just have to listen in to find out.
Good plug. Speaking of, Dan, where can the people find you?
You can find me twice a month on the aforementioned Fantastic Four podcast, the #1 Fantastic Four fan casting podcast on the internet, allegedly.
Congratulations.
No allegations about it. It's #1.
It's #1, baby.
If you listen to any others, tell them they're #2.
100%.
We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube. You can find the show Twitter at Fancast4. You can find my personal Twitter at dhouse77. And I think that's it.
And you guys can find me here on the MontyVerse, all the socials at the MontyVerse. If you're new to the channel, make sure to like the video, hit subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date on all of our latest content, because we have tons of videos coming out all the time about a lot of things, a lot of different things. Until next time, guys.